you at this program. And some of you will remember that we did part one of this program back in August with Stephen Gould, and we had a program from Lean In where we started talking about gender bias and gender equity in the workplace. And so we're really proud to present kind of a part two that we hope will be just one in a series of conversations that we have, whether convened by the chamber or on your own, to continue talking about this really important topic that benefits all of us. So thank you for being with us today. I'm Alexis Earhart, proud to serve as the president and CEO of the Danville, Pittsylvania County Chamber of Commerce, and really pleased to welcome you. Before we jump into our program, I just wanted to take a moment and let you know that we are recording today's program. We've been doing that by and large with all of our programming since the start of the pandemic in an effort to share resources, not only with those who can attend, but often if you cannot. So a lot of our programming, particularly that has been offered at no cost to our members or to the entire community, is on our website. If you go to your member login, you'll find those programs on your member information page, so hope you will revisit that. We are recording this program again, and we'll share the link with you so that you can have that to review. We are grateful to our innovation partners, and these are members who have invested in the mission of the Chamber. They allow us to do our work each day, which this year more than ever has been, we're incredibly appreciative for that. We also have a series of media partners that help us share our messaging and your messaging as we work to create a positive and substantive narrative for our region, both internally and externally, so we're grateful to them. And finally, I would point you to these three websites if you're looking for substantive resources for COVID-19, the Southern Virginia Regional Alliance, the Chamber, and of course the City and County's Economic Development page. All of those have a wide variety of resources to meet your needs, so please take advantage of those. People have worked very hard to keep those updated in real time as well. And finally, Rachel, Donna, and I are very proud to serve you and hope you will reach out if there's anything that we can do for you, not only as we move through recovery, but into what we hope will be a happy and healthy 2021. So with that, I'd love to get into our program. We are joined today by four, I think, very special people. Karl Stauber, retired from Danville Regional Foundation; Jessie Barksdale, retired from the FAA and former member of the Pittsylvania County Board of Supervisors; Dr. Paul Erwin of Chatham Animal Clinic; and Rick Barker of Supply Resources. This panel, I need to give credit where credit is due. This panel was imagined by our We Lead Planning Committee sometime last year, I think, when we were talking about who we really felt, frankly, had credibility in our community and some role models who we could look to for really supporting gender equity in the workplace and in their communities. And so we really want this conversation to be around gender today, but we know that to make the workplace better, this is not limited to gender equity. We need to be thinking about equity and progress for everyone in our workplaces and in our communities. And so as we think about the fact that there are more women in the workplace now than there have ever been before, we need to make equity a cultural norm. We shouldn't be having conversations about wage gaps, behavior, things of that nature. This needs to become a norm. So as we move into the questions, I want to get right to our panelists. And Jessie, I hope it's okay. I want to start with you. I'm hoping that you can discuss some strategies that you've observed or maybe that you've employed as you think about awareness, as you think about sensitivity in the workplace and equity. What are some of the things that you've focused on in your professional career?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I think that's a good question that you posed. And I know that we have our leaders, they have lots of qualities and strengths. And so we need more awareness, sensitivity, fairness, and equity in the workplace. So I'm going to go to a different go and looking at this. It's my answer, what I think might help. And I think you mentioned practicality and what that would look like. So we need more awareness and sensitivity and the rest. What does this mean in practicality? So I think using leadership and practicality, we have to find a sensible and usable tool to enhance our leaders' knowledge in the content of having a good workplace. So what should we do? Should we emphasize education or training? Some people look at education that we think about things, and training involves the way things are done. But in practicality, we have to motivate and help leaders to understand that diversity goes farther than gender and race. A workplace should have a positive working environment by valuing, using, and managing the differences that individuals bring to the workplace. I served in different leader positions in my career, and I learned that you cannot have a balanced workplace if employees are not treated fairly and with dignity and respect. It sounds like the golden rule. But when we talk about having a level workplace, everyone, we're talking about fairness. I'll stop right there, and there's be more a little bit later.
Thank you, Jessie. Paul, I want to go to you because I think you also, speaking of practicality, have some strategies that you've employed in your workplace, and you are the only male, I believe, in your workplace. So can you talk a little bit about things that you've witnessed or things that you've employed at Chatham Animal Clinic?
Yeah, I come at it with a clinic with a female business partner and 15 employees that are all female. A wife and a daughter. So I see it from that angle every single day, both at work and at home. And I think the first thing that for me that I came to realize is that there are differences. And as I tell my kids, what's always fair is not equal. What's always equal is not fair. And so I think right off the bat, you have to make exceptions. It was hard to just have steadfast rules for my clinic. And I acknowledge it's a smaller business with 15, 16 employees. That we're able to do that. But the COVID has brought that even more to light. I had no idea how important, let's say, a hair appointment was to a female versus to me, who it really makes no difference whatsoever when I get one. Scott Waller's the same way. But for some of my employees who came in and said, I have a hair appointment at 1 o'clock, it may last till 3, can I have another hour? This may have been the only hair appointment they could get for 6 months. And so it was hugely important to them. And so when they're good employees, that makes it important to me to try to keep them happy. And the same thing, right or wrong, right or wrongly, there are differences in childcare. I have 3 employees that are single mothers, basically, with children. And so they're responsible for the majority of the childcare. So once again, COVID has put that on them as far as having to work during the day, having to go home and homeschool those children basically, or do something with them. So we've been more lenient in that time with having children come into the office and having the parents do what they need to do to get those children taken care of as a priority, not necessarily just with our business being the priority. And so acknowledging there are differences in medical care. Women, I find for me going to a doctor infrequently, some of my employees go more frequently. So trying to carve out time for them to be able to do that and allow them to do that in their schedule, I think has been beneficial, especially as far as for me retaining good employees that are female. One of the other things that I found was that my female employees sometimes are less likely to speak up for things. And so it's up to me to try to make sure they have a voice that's heard. And so at least in my office, we have customer service representatives that are sort of in the front of the office in one corner. I have veterinarians that are in another corner. I have my technicians and veterinary assistants sort of in one corner, and then my kennel attendants and groomer in another. And so I try to make sure that a couple times a week, I go to the 4 corners of that clinic, that I go to each sort of different group of people, talk to them, ask them what's going on? Is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything not going right? Anything you need that we're not providing you with? And I think that has been beneficial, especially for some of the younger female employees. You know, as much as I try not to be, I think they look at, especially men bosses, and they're afraid to speak up to that, afraid to ask for things, afraid that, you know, we'll look down on them or, you know, hold them, you know, to some inferior standard based on that. So just getting to the different sectors of the clinic and making sure that everybody's voice is heard has been important in my practice.
Thank you, Paul. Karl, same question. Some strategies that you've observed, and I know we've talked a little bit about how the workforce is changing, and that certainly has impacted the way you look at things.
Yeah, and you know, as I think about this over a 40 or 50-year arc, it's amazing how much has changed. And the jobs that were men's jobs or the jobs that were women's jobs 2 decades ago, I think anybody that stayed in those patterns would be foolish today. So how some of you have heard me say, I argue that as a world right now, we're in a talent war. And the places that are able to attract, develop, and retain and promote the most talent are going to be the places that have the highest probability of success. And so we really need to look at ourselves. And I think this is particularly incumbent upon male managers and male leaders. We have to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, do I have some unexplored biases that are causing me to look at, you know, simple example, one of the people that I worked with when I first came to Danville 14 years ago, he kept talking about the girls. And I finally turned to him and I said, so when do girls become women? And he looked at me and he said, well, I've always called them girls. And I said, yeah, and if I always called you boy, would that be demeaning to you? And he said, no, it wouldn't be demeaning to me at all. Well, a couple of weeks later, he came back to me and he said, I hear what you're saying. So this willingness to explore our own, and a lot of us, you know, it comes from the way we were raised and all of those types of things. But that's not, the way we were raised is not a justification for continuing to do the wrong thing. It's calling out to us to figure out what the right thing is, and at times ask our fellow employees, so what should I be doing? It doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but if you never ask, like Paul was talking about, if you don't go to the four corners of the office and have those conversations, you may be missing some very, very important signals. So, you know, understanding how critical talent is, understanding how, I mean, one of the things I would call on people to do is look at the structure of their own organizations. How many women are leading parts of their organizations? And is that appropriate? Or does that need to change? And if it needs to change, how do you get it to change over time? If your suppliers have a bias that causes them to not work well with the women in your organization or the people of color in your organization or whatever it might be, then you need to be having you as the leader manager need to be having that conversation. So those are just a couple of the things that I've beat my head against over the years.
Thank you, Karl. You know, I want to put a fine point on yours about male managers, because for better or for worse, that's often a more effective strategy. If I make the same point, it might be seen that I'm being overly sensitive or any number of other qualities. And frankly, I've been a bit beneficiary of all 4 of you advocating for me, as have many of my peers. And I think it's one of the reasons that we asked you to do this program was because that's a natural habit for each of you. And so I just think that's a critical point here. Rick, I want to come to you now. Same question, strategies you've observed as we think about fairness and awareness and equity in the workplace.
Sure, thank you, Alexis. And I know that while the focus is on being inclusive, thinking primarily of women today with the We Lead program, I like to echo what Jessie mentioned, that we need to be thinking about yes, women inclusion, but diversity of all kinds, whether that's gender, race, nationality, if we're working domestically, maybe even within different regions of the country. It's so easy to fall into that trap, say in my case, to want to talk to, consider candidates for employment who look like I look, talk like I look, and talk like I talk, maybe have a similar background, similar education background. And it can be an unconscious bias, but as Karl says, that's not a fair excuse. We need to be challenging ourselves and asking ourselves greater questions. And so the challenges, I often look at it within our brands, is I want to have the greatest appeal to the broadest audience. And so in order to do that, I fundamentally believe that my workforce needs to be reflective of both my customer base and my supplier base. So I have customers who look at my organization and they look for that diversity. And I used to stop there. I used to say, I'm going to satisfy my customer base. But then, because we don't make anything, we only sell products and services, now I've taken it upon myself to behave the way my customers do and look at my supply chain and ask the similar questions of my suppliers. And so that shaped some of the decisions that we make on the hiring front, so that we have that same diversity that our customer base does. And so ultimately, what we're all chasing is greater outcomes. At the end of the day, we're going to reverse engineer this from results backwards and try to determine how is it that we create the best results. And I know that when I have to make a decision, if there is a female in the room, and if there's someone younger in the room, and if there's someone who speaks differently and looks differently, ultimately that's the people who are informing me, and it's helpful because I already know what I know. My fear going forward is that my competition might know something that I don't know. So I always go into presentations and meetings often. If I'm worried, I'm confident in my team, but I'm worried about the part that I don't know, and I'm often advised by someone who's not a middle-aged white guy who just echoes what I think. I might be generous still calling myself middle-aged, but among some of the things that we do here, and for everyone who may not know, if you think of us as doing a few things, we do packaging, we do logistics, and we do a little real estate. And in the packaging and in the logistics, these are male-dominated industries. So, and by the way, when I say logistics, I'm talking about warehousing, order fulfillment and warehousing. Think of forklift drivers, is the most popular job in the warehouse. Trucking, whether we're trucking or working with incoming freight companies. And so a lot of people in and out of our warehouses every day are truckers. And so this is a male-dominated industry. And interestingly, our distribution center in Danville is managed by a woman, former military, completely capable of handling that male-dominated environment. And in our Lynchburg distribution center, same thing. We hired someone that's an entry-level position, and she has been, we were able to help send her to school, back to college, which was not a goal of hers when she entered the company, and now she's risen to be the warehouse manager over 4 facilities in Lynchburg. Just conveniently that we're talking today, I'll also add that tonight, after this call, I'll be making a job offer to someone as an operations manager. And so we've just looked at the available talent, and the best resume that came in, and it just happens to be that this is best resume with the highest compensation, was from a woman, and I'll be making an offer to her this evening. And so I'm not hiring these people because they're women. I want to make the point that in the effort to be fair is first, before I'm inclusive, I have to fail to be exclusive, and there's a slight difference there. And so my conscious decision is not to exclude women for these male-dominated positions. And once I get that far, it's the woman's, the woman has to then compete effectively to win the job. And in my case, that's been happening with more frequency. And I think we fare very favorably to our competition. And so as I talked about that reverse engineering, if we talk about results and outcomes and go back from that to try to engineer or to find what in our recipe that creates positive results can we then replicate. You know, we've had good success, and we know that probably some of our competitors are less receptive to female applicants in this category. So I think I'll leave it at that unless you have some questions.
No, I think those are really important points, that the best candidates will rise to the top. But making sure that you're not being exclusive in any way is critical. You know, Paul mentioned sort of checking in with his female employees as a way to support them and give them voice. And so I'm hoping, and Rick, I'll stay with you for this one. If you can talk a little bit about maybe a time you've observed a female employee or colleague speaking out about maybe something that happened at their organization, or maybe as an example of when you served as an ally, or for those who were on the previous call, we started using the term accomplice instead of ally, which I love, to support your female colleagues, because I think we'd be hard pressed to find a female, certainly on this call and in our community, who hasn't had some experience for which she could have spoken out. And I would argue that the majority probably have not. And hopefully we'll see that change over time. But Rick, I want to stay with you to see if you could kick us off. We're going to go to each of our panelists and talk a little bit about some of those experiences.
Sure, and I might give you an unexpected answer, so I'm glad to have the question. We did several years ago have an unfortunate circumstance where a female employee had to make an appeal to me concerning their male superior to whom they reported. And you might think I'm about to tell you how I solved this problem, but because we're a small company, and in this case, it was the first time we had an occurrence, I have zero experience with this. And so where I need to make a decision and I have zero experience, I default to my advisors. My advisor, in this case, happens to be on the call, Stephen Gould, who has a specialty in this HR category. So I simply gathered the facts, shared them with Stephen, and asked him the appropriate action. And without me having to struggle to be decisive, I followed the playbook. And I think Stephen's advice was good. It kept us in bounds. I didn't show preference to either party. I think Stephen's advice helped me be more objective. And so I offer that to say that, you know, if a male manager gets in a spot where he's not comfortable because he doesn't have experience, then it might be worthwhile to seek those who do have the experience and can provide guidance and then follow that course of action. I did with good results.
That's great. Great advice.
I was able to retain both employees.
Wow. Jessie, I know you have some insights on this too. Can we go to you on this?
Yeah. I want to say something, but I'm going to get to something different. Women and men who serve in a role, leader, could be a manager, supervisor, team leader, and others, should never tolerate for prejudice, racism, discrimination, and harassment in the workplace. I think I've discovered rather, a new barrier against women. My last position with the FAA, I was the manager of a consultant branch, and we answered to Congress, the military, the airlines, just about everybody. The person, the dad on the lead, and the airplanes was, you know, just messing up their fishing. But when I got there, well, let me back it up. I found out through practicality, thinking, understand that the people, if you're a leader, the people working with you may know more than you. And a lot of people, a lot of men, I think, have never thought about that. And on my staff, I had two, not one, but two rocket scientists. I know that the real title is aero space engineers. And so they would come in and say to me, they would walk in and I would say, is whatever you have, is it rocket science? And they would say, no, it's just work. But I never thought about that, that you can be a leader, but you don't know everything. And I think that some men can have some issues with that. But anyway, I want to say too that how do we fix some of this and get awareness and sensitivity? We've got education or we've got training, but if we can't go the formal development and training, if it's not an option, because sometimes there's no money or anything like that, we have to, you know, innovate. We can do things like have details, go some other place for 30, get some awareness. We can have mentoring. We can have leadership shops and things like that, or projects. So it's a way to do that. I mean, I did a lot of that. I started at the lowest rung, and with doing things like that, I ended up at the top. And sometimes you make it, and sometimes that you don't. But I think that's something that we can do. So I'll leave it right there.
Thank you. Paul, I want to come to you now, and I know you, again, you talked about this a little bit of giving your colleagues voice, but can you offer some other examples of maybe some time that women have come forward and spoken out and how that was handled, either at the clinic or somewhere else that you've been? Oh, you're on mute.
Yep, unmute myself. One of the things that we have dealt with is being a mixed animal veterinary clinic. We do large animal services. And so the large animal, the cattle, horse world tends to be dominated by men, at least ownership wise. And so I had hired 2 female large animal veterinarians past 10, 15 years ago, and both had failed miserably. And looking back, it was really me that failed them. And so just recently, within the last year and a half, I'd hired another large animal veterinarian that was a female, Dr. Franks. She was an Aviation graduate and then Auburn graduate, and she was fantastic. And so I realized some of the mistakes I'd made, and I think the biggest thing that I learned is that I had to control the narrative of what my clients and customers thought with those female associates to professionals. And so to start with, as soon as I'd hired her, before she even came on board, I knew 6 months ahead, I told all of my large animal clients, every time I saw one, next time you come, it may be a female veterinarian, Dr. Barker. Next time you come, it may be this. So when she got here, everyone was extremely well prepared for her. And so I thought we really succeeded. So a couple months in, then we started getting, oh, can you send out the pretty little lady vet? Oh, can you send out the young, sweet little girl? And so, I joke, if I told Alexa's pretty young lady individually, she'd probably think they were all compliments. If I talk to her that way in a professional setting, they're really not, they're demeaning. And so we had a hard time with clients with that. And the veterinarian, she was fine with it. She understood that nobody really meant anything by that. And so as a staff, we decided that we'd try to change that narrative and that we would try to take control of it. And so every time somebody would call with that, my customer service representatives would say, oh, do you mean the smart, young, nice veterinarian? Do you mean the brilliant, kind veterinarian? And so it really became kind of a joke until one day I heard one of my staff say, yes, we're going to send the brilliant, kind vet out, not the old grumpy one. And so then it really became funny. And so now we have clients calling, and instead of asking for myself or Dr. Barker, they ask for the smart, nice veterinarian or the grumpy, cynical veterinarian, which would be me. And so I'm fine with that, but what it did was it changed the narrative. The client started looking at her in a joking way as the smart, nice veterinarian, and it got them to quit calling her the pretty young vet or the pretty young lady or the little girl vet or anything like that. And so I think there are ways that you can control what your clients see and how they treat people without just jumping on them and saying, don't call me that or something like that, is to try to change that narrative to something where, everybody's more happy with what's going on with it. And so that was one thing we've done, and it still continues to this day. And now a lot of clients are sending out that brilliant, young, nice vet. And so my staff has a lot of fun with that as an opposition to me.
I think it's a fantastic suggestion. It's something that we can all take back and do immediately, right? Very practical. So thank you for that. Karl, same question. Wrap this one up for us. What you've observed in this space.
Well, several years ago, I was part of a gathering. And a person that was at that gathering, who was not an employee of DRF, but was an appropriate part of the meeting, proceeded to behave in an inappropriate way towards one of the women in the meeting. And it was not just politically incorrect. It was sexual harassment. And I observed it, and 3 or 4 other people in the gathering observed it. And we all talked to each other afterwards, just to make sure that, you want to verify that what you saw, you actually saw, because it was such inappropriate behavior that you're sitting there going, no, I didn't really see that, did I? The other 3 people I talked to about it were all female and had all observed it and were all very upset about it. we had a long conversation about, okay, how are we going to handle this, and how are we going to go to the people who had employed this man and file a complaint. And we came to the conclusion that it was much riskier for the three of them and the businesses that they ran. It was much riskier for them to be seen as the point on that complaint than it was for me. And so, one of the lessons is be aware of the risk you're taking and see if you can find an ally. What was the word you used, Alexis? Accomplice?
Accomplice.
Accomplice.
It's more fun.
See if you can find an accomplice that is in a less risky position. So being thoughtful, I mean, nobody wants to find themselves in this situation, but so what happened was I discussed it with my board. I went in and talked to this person's boss, filed a formal complaint, and nothing was done about it. It was swept under the table, and that was very frustrating. But as often happens, people that engage in inappropriate behavior one time are going to engage in inappropriate behavior again. And several months later, this person did engage in inappropriate behavior again. And this time when it happened, and I was not present at that one, but it led to another complaint being filed and the person being fired. So so two thoughts. One is to think intentionally when you find yourself in these awful situations, to think intentionally about what's the risk and who can best bear it, and finding the ally that's in the least risky position. And then secondly, realize that even though you may not get the outcome you want the first time, you're setting a pattern, and it's critical for if accountability is to occur, it's critical to establish that pattern. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think it's an incredibly powerful example, again, of how you used your privilege in a positive and productive way. And I think that each of us in different scenarios has the power to do that. We're getting some questions in the chat, and I want to get to those. We did have one more question, and Karl, I'm going to pick on you just to answer this. If any of our other panelists want to answer it as well, you're welcome to. But Karl, if you want to hit this, and then we can jump into the participant questions. We're in a global pandemic. We have high unemployment, political division, social division, like I don't want to say never seen in this country. It's been some time since we've seen it like this. How does that change this conversation and make us rethink how we approach equity now?
Yeah, for our people on the Zoom call, Alexis chaired a panel this morning with Riverview Rotary, where we were talking about the impact of COVID-19 on various elements of the business community. And I just found it a very interesting and informative discussion. So part of the way I would answer that question is, one, retention of talent becomes even more important. And stepping out of, well, this is the way we've always done it, becomes even more important, because the way you've always done it may actually be the way that's going to fail now. But I think one of the really interesting things, maybe one of the positive things about the pandemic, is it gives everyone a chance to look at their employer and say, am I being treated appropriately during the pandemic? It's a great case study that we're all in. And if you're pleased with what your employer is doing, that doesn't mean you agree with everything, because this is a time of compromise. But then that ought to reinforce the attractiveness of where you are, and it ought to create an opportunity for you to say, well, maybe this is the time. Maybe I can get my boss to think a little more outside of the box. And maybe we can try something new that before I wouldn't have felt comfortable even raising. So I think it does represent lots of challenges, lots of heartache, lots of economic pain. There's no question about that. But it also creates an opportunity to maybe try some things that wouldn't have been possible before.
I think that's a really important point, because we know that women specifically have taken on more of the caretaking at home, whether it's childcare or they're the parent maybe who's working at home, certainly for single mothers and single fathers too, but there's the added burden. And we know that women have been impacted at higher rates across many sectors. So I think that's a really important point. I want to move into the participant questions, but do any of our other panelists want to hit on that before we do? If not, I'm going to move on. We have some good questions here. What are some ways that we can help others see the value, or, and I love this, the return on investment in some of these creative and flexible practices, specifically that Jessie and Paul mentioned, that might be required in creating equity for diverse workplaces? How do we help others connect the dots?
Yeah, I responded to that a little bit. You know, it's extremely expensive from an economic standpoint to try to rehire and retrain employees, especially good employees. So I think most business managers, owners would also agree that keeping the employees you have is much more efficient economic wise. And then especially if they're a good employee, as Karl said earlier, we're in a talent war. I mean, I'm always looking to steal somebody else's employees, especially if they're good. And so if I've got a good employee, the last thing I want to do is lose them because I'm unwilling to bend a little bit here or there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the economic and the return on investment for a good employee, you know, pretty easy to see from an owner standpoint.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? The next question we have is one that we've certainly talked about in some other WeLead programs and probably at length on the planning committee. Can any of the panelists, do they have experience with woman-to-woman discrimination or lack of support, and how they've handled that? So often we think of men creating the hurdles and barriers in the workplace for women, but often it's other women, in many cases where there's a generational difference. So can you talk about any experience you have with that? And that goes to anyone.
I have not had that experience, so I can't take to that.
Well, it seems to me discrimination is discrimination. It doesn't matter whether it's male to male, female to female, straight to gay. You know, discrimination is discrimination. And if you're a manager or a leader in your organization, you have a responsibility to hear what you don't want to hear. And you have a responsibility to engage that in a way that is best for the people involved and best for the organization that you have responsibility for. And so, you know, I think the biggest mistake I see being made, and I have made myself, is to say, oh, well, that's two women and they need to figure it out. And if one of them were a guy, I would not think that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that kind of and obviously you've got to hear all sides of the issue and all of those types of things. And I can imagine right now with people being so busy and finding it so hard to connect, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to just kind of put that aside for now.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is putting aside concerns about unequal treatment always bites. So dealing with it well, having clear policies that are gender neutral, and sexual orientation neutral and race neutral, you know, and making sure that people know it's there. So I get, I was sued one time by a male employee over sexual discrimination. And because I had fired him. And you know, spent a lot of time talking to a lot of attorneys, pardon my statement about attorneys, but spent a lot of time in meetings that did not add, that I didn't feel like added to the short-term productivity of the organization I was running. But in terms of the long-term productivity, being clear, and so all my other 40 employees understood what was going on within the constraints of privacy and all those types of things. So it's very time-consuming. It's very emotionally draining. But ducking is not, in my experience, a wise strategy.
I
think that's
Alexis, I'd
yes.
like to say something.
Oh, sure.
Okay. There's a resource. I don't know if the other people with us are aware of the federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you wanted to see a case and how it turned out or anything, everything in the world in terms of protecting those things that are unlawful. So that's all you have to do. It's more information you could see, read, and look at, you know, before you you retire. It's just really nothing but information. Any kind of case you want to see how it went and what was the verdict and that sort of thing, it's all there.
Jessie, thank you for raising that. It actually relates perfectly to a comment/question that someone has posed. And, you know, we have the EEOC, organizations and businesses have policies in place, and yet there's still so much hesitancy among women often to speak out. So we have a disconnect, and that probably comes from a history of not being supported. And I think we're seeing that change. So for the panelists, how do we work to support, I guess, female colleagues to create a culture, right? Because it's not just policy. So how can we create, and this sort of comes from the question that was posed, how do we create that culture where it's safe to do that? And particularly in a small community, I think that's an additional challenge that some women may feel, raising an issue like that in a small community.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jessie, please.
I was going to say the law is there, so it's just we got to change some. We're going to go back to that awareness and attention because some people don't know that that's you know, it's unlawful to do that.
Right.
So.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Cultural norms are very powerful. And, you know, my experience is that generational perspectives also play into this. And so how, if you're a leader within your organization, whether it's a formal leader or an informal leader, being clear about what's supported, what's tolerated, and what's not is very critical. Because people will, you know, if you're clear about what's supported and what's not supported, that's not going to cause everybody to stand up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to change the conversation in the lunchroom when none of the bosses are present, or in the parking lot, or after work. And I just think we need to be very aware of what we're supporting, what we're tolerating, and what we're not tolerating, what we're actively opposing.
Mm-hmm.
And we need consistency is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned those lessons the hard way.
Well, I want to put an exclamation point on what you said. It's one thing to allow and it's one thing to actively oppose. Those are two very different actions that I think as leaders we all need to consider. We do have another question in the chat. I know we're winding down on time, but I want to ask one more, again, to any of our panelists. Have you had a practice or a policy that you developed and adopted with female employees in mind, sort of at the onset, but as time went on, realized that it was appreciated by all of your employees? If not, maybe Paul, you'll get a male employee with really long hair who needs that appointment,
Needs that
right?
hair appointment. Yeah. So I can't hire Scott.
Poor Scott.
Well, I've never had a complaint, EEO complaint, but I did volunteer to be a investor, I guess, a counselor for those kinds of things. So, but no, I've never had a complaint in my career.
Well, good. If there are no other questions, we'll end a few minutes early this afternoon. I do want to offer truly my heartfelt thanks to Karl and Rick and Paul and Jessie for your time in preparing and your time in being here, but also your just continued leadership in our community and in your businesses and organizations. We're very grateful to you and look forward to continuing on this journey together. And so with that, more to come on this, and I hope you'll continue the conversations with your networks as well. And I wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.